if you just have a basic idea of how to niche down on certain topics, it can help kind of expedite the growth. I think what's also helped is just being really active with replying to every comment too, and being like a human and not just producing for people to consume, but like giving back a little bit when it comes to engagement.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Struggle to Strength podcast, your source for real life application on how to turn your struggles into strengths in all things mind, muscle, and money. So, dude, we had Jake Boyd on here, who is a shoe. He's a shoe reviewer. He's a coach. He's got a CSCS, his bachelor's in science, his master's in sports science. Super knowledgeable dude, and he's kind of taken that into a really niche location where he does shoe reviews on YouTube, and he's built a pretty gnarly following just from doing shoe reviews. Yeah. Which is really cool. So we talked to Jake today about how he made that happen. The concept of niching, but how I don't know how to say that.
No, word. I don't know how to say it either.
But the way to do that and kind of his strategy around creating content, the intention that he has with each video that he posts, how he creates the funnel type approach to getting more exposure on his videos and essentially getting his viewers to where he wants them to be. And this was a really helpful podcast for me as I'm trying to grow my YouTube. So I hope if you, the listeners, are trying to grow yours or your social media in general, or just want to learn more about how to make better content that's more fun, that's less data driven, and that actually does more of what you want it to do, this is a really good one. So I highly recommend y'all get your notepads out and have a good listen here and go give Jake a follow. We'll see you all inside. You've reviewed a lot of things. You've written a lot of articles. What exactly is it that you find is most enjoyable about what you do? Is it like trying out new shoes and whatnot? Is it actually helping people become better? Like, what is it that you enjoy the most?
I think it's a blend of a little bit of everything, because obviously like when you're running your own business and doing the same thing every day, there's always like an ebb and flow of enjoyment and things that can be tedious. And so for background here, I review training shoes, weightlifting shoes, barefoot shoes, and some guys' apparel here and there. But my main niche is performance-focused shoes. And that is for a written website that I run, which I fully pretty much do by myself, and then a YouTube channel, which I run and and edit all my own content on. And I think what's most enjoyable with it at this point is being able to have the depth to recognize nuances between different and new shoes coming out that people are like, oh, well, should I spend more money on the new, or should I go old? Should I find something on sale? And I think that's like kind of like the whole thing that I get my enjoyment and kicks out of lately, because like obviously like it gets tedious doing the same thing every day, and like it's not always fun to write the articles and stuff. But I think the actual interaction of being able to help people find stuff and not waste their money, that's where I get my kicks these days. And I think building the community and stuff that has my back when it comes to review content and trusting the content I'm producing has been really key and really fun to build out, because like my whole shtick with my business is kind of like the middle finger to the media sites that get products for review and then don't actually test them and just try to swindle affiliate money. So the whole anti kind of like big media approach to review content and helping out community, and like when people are just so genuinely like, oh wow, like thank you so much for literally just getting back to me, that's where I'm like, this is fucking cool. Like I can actually see where I'm hopefully helping folks when it comes to financial investments, but then also training with getting the right pairs of shoes on their feet for what they're doing, and my background's in coaching. So having the nuances between recognizing the different styles of footwear and how different shoes vary, but then also having like the biomechanics background and the programming background, it's like this cool blend of like, okay, cool, I can apply my training brain here to help this person actually find the right pair of shoes, versus me just blindly saying like, oh yeah, use this because this is the new thing or it works, or it's the depth there that I've really found enjoyment in lately.
That's cool. And like for context, like Jake has recently grown like a really successful and like very niche like business of his own around like creating content and like shoe reviews and stuff. And so I thought it would be just really interesting to talk about that, because it's something we've talked about on this podcast before, how like everybody like, things are changing, but the majority of people think like go to college, get a corporate job, or, in terms of like entrepreneurship, it's like, anything that is like very obvious. But what you did is like, you kind of started in doing one thing and then you found something like very specific and niche that you thought was like really interesting and kind of like grew that. And that's what like you're doing now, you know, more of. So definitely like, I guess, what did you start with? Like you said, you were coaching before, like, where did you start and what were you doing first? Like when did you move over to coaching from like any sort of corporate job, or have you always been working for yourself?
Yeah, so it's kind of like a longish story, but I'll sum it up pretty quickly. When I was like 18 or 19, probably a couple of years before that, actually, like I had this whole dream because I grew up in Missouri to like move to New York City and be this editor at Men's Health. Like I wanted to work in the fitness editorial world. So I'm going to school at that point in New York, moved from Missouri, was majoring in like journalism and PR. And then I started thinking, I'm like, well, like I want to coach people too. And if I want to write about fitness and training, like, I don't want to be the journalist that has to either lean on experts all the time that knows really nothing in the field, but yet they're writing about it, or the journalist that like kind of like fakes it to make it, which I don't necessarily believe in. So then I shifted gears and went to my bachelor's in exercise science, master's in sports science, and started coaching full-time in college before kind of doing like the full-time editorial gig. So I was coaching athletes for like 2 or 3 years and eventually found my way into like a full-time editorial job at Vitamin Shop. They headhunted me because I was building up the blog at my gym's web, like my gym site, basically just kind of like having fun and like learning a little bit more about content production and applying what we were doing in the gym to on-site stuff, and basically got poached by Vitamin Shop, went full-time editorial, shifted training to part-time, and then eventually got poached by this company called Barbend, which is a strength sports media site. They do a bunch of like strongman, CrossFit, powerlifting, whatever news. So I did that for 4 years, basically got burnt out. I was like their first full-time employee, sick experience, learned a lot. But in that process, there was a lot that I learned about the industry that I loved when it comes to editorial content and a lot that I didn't like. And so I think once I got to that point of burnout, I had to take a step back and kind of like leave that role to be like, okay, like what the fuck do I actually want to do with my life? Do I want to do training full time? Do I want to do editorial full time? What does my life actually look like in a couple of years? And with enough tinkering and enough failing with trying a couple business ideas that just did not work, I eventually was like, you know what? Like at Barbend, I built up their vertical for training shoe reviews. And I really love that vertical because it ties a lot of my interests together. It ties my coaching and training background. It ties my love for just fitness, like focused performance gear. So like my background too is like I always wanted to create something like apparel or shoes eventually one day. So I'm like, oh, like this is sick. Like I could play in all these different worlds and verticals and build content on it. And just basically started building out reviews again for myself this time. And it started to get a little bit of traction. And a year and a half, almost 2 years later, here we are with the site that you said is successful. And it's funny because I don't think that, but then it's like more so lately, I've had a lot of people start to copy and poach my shit. So now I feel like I am at a point of success where I'm like, yeah, okay, like I have people headhunting me now. Like I feel like we're kind of at a critical mass when it comes to getting enough attention in the space. So
dude, honestly, like I feel like if you start something of your own like that so many people fail at, and 2 years later you're still doing it and paying your bills or more than paying your bills, to me that's successful. Because like most people just give up or fail like pretty quickly, you know.
Yeah, I feel that. But yeah, it's been a really cool journey, and like right now, I guess my full time would be like editorial, quote unquote, because I run my own site and YouTube channel, but I also still coach like 10 athletes on the side because I want skin in the game. And I think it keeps me sharp too with both my coaching brain and how that applies to shoe reviews. So yeah, it's been like this kind of like back and forth of like coaching, editorial. So it's been a little bit of like this hybrid blend of like a kind of corporate structure, but then to a startup structure. But now I'm on my own. So I feel like I naturally digress from like, starts corporate, he goes startup, and then he's like, fuck all of this, I'm doing my own thing.
That's what I did.
Yeah,
that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, we all follow that exact same process, actually. Corporate, startup.
We were like ultimate structure, and then we were like, that's too much, like give me a little bit of leeway, and then we were like, actually I just want to make the rules. I'm cool with that. 100%. That's awesome. And I saw your YouTube, both your YouTube and your Instagram. You have a good amount of engagement and attention on your YouTube. YouTube, I think, is even harder to grow than the Instagram. Would you say? You have like 16,000 subs and followers on both, though.
Yeah, so YouTube is definitely a slower burn. Like truthfully, Instagram, if I could burn that thing to the ground, I would. Like I just don't I just post there to show I'm still alive and like interact with folks who do reach out through Instagram, because some folks don't like commenting on YouTube videos, which I totally understand. They don't want to have their comment out. So people will DM me like every day. I probably answer like 5 to 10 DMs about shoes or apparel. So that's kind of why I keep the Instagram still going. And it's just fun to share training content too, because I think it helps add a little bit of depth in the context of like, hey, like I actually fucking train with the stuff I'm using versus a lot of these reviewers who will say a shoe's not stable and then go show us a 225-pound deadlift. Like you can hop off, but I'll save that rant for another time. Yeah, so YouTube's definitely a slower burn, and it's just like a lot of fucking shipping. And I think if you just have a basic idea of how to niche down on certain topics, it can help kind of expedite the growth. And I think what's also helped is just being really active with replying to every comment too, and being like a human and not just producing for people to consume, but like giving back a little bit when it comes to engagement. You know, like I never want to be that content producer that builds out all these videos, but then never replies to anybody who spends their limited finite time of their lives on your videos. So I think that's also kind of helped expedite that growth. But I think just being really consistent, niching down, and then kind of having an eye for like, okay, like this topic is niche, but there's going to be enough interest in it to where there's not going to be as much competition for it, you know? So it's like, if I was going to build like a back squat guide video, that would get buried. But if I build something very specific, like back squat guide for like taller lifters, or as you get more niche with it, I think that's how you can kind of expedite that YouTube growth. So yes, it's tougher to generally build YouTube channels, but if you're consistent with it and you figure out like where your niches and strengths lie and the kind of the community you want to build and how you want to present yourself, I think you can expedite that a little bit regarding your speed. Now, obviously that varies, but that's kind of how I see it. And I wouldn't say that I've grown necessarily super fast, because 16K over 2 months, 2 years, like it's not crazy growth, but it's also not super slow growth. So I'm just really grateful that it's been nice and organic, and I haven't had to like clout chase for any of the subs and stuff like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Is YouTube like the best channel you think for, you know, growing a business, for instance?
I think it's one of the better channels in regard to adding authority to a business, but then also like longevity of content consumption, because since YouTube's owned by Google, like it's not going away. It's only going to continue to innovate. Like you're seeing them roll out more shorts and get more involved with how they're trying to engage more of like eyeballs on that platform versus like going from TikTok to Instagram and stuff like that. And I also think with the social channels, you're a little bit more at the mercy of like whatever those companies want to do with their algorithm. Whereas with YouTube, if you understand just like even basic SEO or just basic search principles, like you can better leverage content to be found by the eyeballs you want. And then if you can figure out how to translate that to your product or your website or your service, then it could be like this nice little passive funnel lead for bringing more eyeballs to your brand, and then also just building a community nice and slowly too. So I think there's a lot of benefit with YouTube regarding like how it can add basically just more authority to what you're trying to build. Because if you're constantly putting yourself out there with longer form content, it's not going to necessarily pop off like a big 1 mil plus viral video on Instagram. But with enough slow burn, people will start to be like, okay, like I see their face all the time when I search this type of content. Let me go actually see what they're about. And then you have a better chance, I think, of building like a really, truly beneficial lead for your business.
Mm-hmm. How right now are you structuring your posting of shorts versus like traditional YouTube videos?
Honestly, man, like with shorts, because they're still so new, I have a team who's finally helping me edit some of my like longer form YouTube videos into shorter pieces of content, because my editing skills are finite and I only have so much time. So I'm having them help me out, and I'm just kind of like at the moment playing with like, okay, I'm going to upload this to shorts, see what happens. So yeah, I don't know if I necessarily am the right person to ask for that, because I'm also just doing a lot of plug and play right now. But right now, like when it comes to like long form videos, I'll publish anywhere from like 2 to 4, sometimes 5 YouTube videos a week. And then with shorts, like 2 to 3 videos a week. I'm trying to actually uptick that a little bit more just because they're really easy to publish. But it really varies too based off of like shoes rolling out and whatnot. So if it's like a big week of like shoe releases, like that might be a week basically of higher volume video production. So it really varies. And shorts have been a great tool, I think, for just getting more shots on net, more eyeballs. But I don't know how much they're actually playing into an uptick of subscribers. Like every short gets a couple of subs, but like what are the quality of those subs? That's what I'm still trying to figure out, because with long form content, if you're watching like a Nike Metcon 8 review that I publish and you subscribe, you're likely interested in reviews. Now, if you're liking a video where I explain why I like barefoot shoes, I don't exactly know why you're subbing yet. And you might be somebody who like subs and then you're like, actually, I don't like this channel content. So you then end up leaving. And there's just no way of really tracking that data just yet.
Okay. Are you, so I'm working on getting into YouTube right now. And I've got a couple friends who are, have made had a lot of success on YouTube. And I'm always curious to hear from everyone that I speak to that has, what metrics do you find get the most visibility? Like what length of video on your long form content do you try to stick to? Are there any specific formats to your hooks or anything that you find are most valuable to keeping viewer attention or that translate the best?
Yeah. So speaking of metrics, I am not a big, like, this video has to be this length, this video has to be that. I don't like approaching content with that. And what I've found is that when you take that mindset of like, okay, I'm building this piece of content and it has to be like around 7 to 9 minutes because that's a sweet spot. Like, I think it could be very limiting because then it puts you in this mindset of like, okay, I have to fit it versus like, am I really answering the questions and the content of this video? So realistically, man, it varies a lot. And I don't pay attention at all to length because in every video, I timestamp everything. I have a similar-ish flow so people know what to expect with reviews, comparisons, best lists. And that way they can choose like how much they want to watch. They can jump around. Because my big thing is like, I'm not the YouTuber that wants you to stay on my channel all fucking day. Like, I don't care. Like, I want you to get the info you need when you need it, get it in timely manner, because I think that's more valuable to creating a returning visitor and a returning consumer versus trying to like get somebody to watch as much as you can because of the video being like this type of like, you know, it's one of those things that I try not to think too much about. And I think from my past experiences, when I have tried to be more metric driven, especially with video content on YouTube, it's kind of fucked up my mindset a little bit towards making content that I enjoy, but then also making content that really answers like the nuances and depth of things that I want to make content on. So to answer your question, it varies. I mean, with video structure, I am very particular about that, but that's not because of like me wanting more subs. It's just because like, I'm like, okay, in this review, how can I deliver this in a way that makes sense to people, will be efficient, and also just answer every question they have? And then if it's 12 minutes, if it's 15 minutes, if it's 8 minutes, I don't really care. Am I getting the point across? Am I delivering enough depth to where I can like publish this video and feel good about it? That's what I mostly care about. So I do apologize that I don't have much more insights there on specific metrics, but that's just
a lot
not
of
how
insight. I feel like.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of insight too. I feel like that was a really good answer. I think a lot of people do get caught up. No, I think a lot of people do get caught up, and like we're in a world where we have Instagram Insights, we have that monthly feedback from YouTube of like, check out how everything did, and you're like looking through and trying to figure out, okay, well, this video did really well, this short did really well. How can I recreate that and make it similar, but answer another question? And like sometimes we get a little bit of data information overload, and like what it sounds like you're saying is like, dude, I just like making videos. Like, that's it. I just like making videos, man.
Yeah, like one of the things that I used to get really stressed about, and this is a lesson that I had to learn, like as an entrepreneur, especially an entrepreneur who is building a content production business, is if you let data constantly dictate how you're supposed to feel, you're going to be so much more dysregulated or unregulated for that matter, and like way more reactive with what you're doing. And it takes a lot of effort, I think, to kind of step back from that, because you're like, oh, if this video popped off, like, boom, dopamine. How do I level that up? How do I do that next? And it's like the moment you fall into that trap, you're now like kind of at the whim of the algorithms. You're kind of at the whim of whatever the fuck is going to potentially happen with that video, which is literally anything, as we know. Like, you can produce a really high quality video and it flops, and then you produce a piece of shit and it like takes off. You just don't know. So the thing that's kind of helped me in the back of my mind, if you're a content producer or somebody who's building a business and you are very like view oriented or sub oriented with your quote unquote growth and like building of that business, is at the end of the month, like, are you growing slowly or like just a little bit? You know, you don't need a ton. Are you growing a little bit? Sure. Are you engaging with people? Are you really building a community that is really solid? Sure. Like, that's what I think matters most. And yeah, it's like, it's tough though, not to not fall into those metrics, because they want you to fall into those metrics. They want you to feed them more. And how do you walk that line? It's like, if revenue is consistent or going up even slowly, and if the community is growing nice and organically and slowly, like that's all I need. And I think people get it twisted when they think about like how much they really need to build a successful business to let them live a lifestyle they want. And that's where I think you can gain a lot, where if you take a step back from that and you're like, okay, this is realistically like how much I need. It's really not that much. Then it makes it a lot better. And I think easier on the mindset when there are those ebbs and flows, because you will have down months. You will have posts that flop, and it is what it is. You will have content that flops. You might have products that flop. But if you can stay consistent with like realistically looking at the bottom line things that really are driving the business, I think that can really be helpful versus like getting wrapped up in this month you had this many subs, but that's up or down from last month, you know, because then it can drive you into this panic of like, what the fuck am I doing? Stay the course, level up slowly, tweak and like try little things as you go to see what works, what doesn't, but don't like be reactive, because I've lived that life and it's a miserable life and you burn yourself out really fast doing that shit.
You did say you had like kind of like a structure that you like to follow. So it's like, seems like, yeah, the goal is just to like give people good information, help them, and, you know, not worry too much about like views and things like that. Just kind of like let that come. But you do have kind of like a structure to the video. What are the things when it comes to like logistics, structure, whatever, like what are the things that are important to you?
Yeah. So I think it's taking a step back and thinking about like the intent of the content that you want to create, right? So if I'm, for example, building a guide on getting more email leads, like what are the main questions? What are the main things that somebody wants to know about that? And then kind of figuring out, okay, what can I timestamp to answer this question, this question, this question, basically trying to cover all of the bases that come along with that content. And then based on what you're trying to build with your business, trying to replicate somewhat of a structure there, because if you are somebody like in my world where you're building out a lot of repetitive content, having structure can be really useful in the context of like, okay, every review has pros, cons, performance, sizing, who is this best for, price, you know, like it has this nice structure to it because it answers all the questions on the intent of content I want to produce. So what I mean more so with that is like, okay, if I'm building out this type of content, what type of structure will be efficient for folks and what really answers all of the questions in a nice, meaningful way? And then if they come back to my channel expecting similar-esque topics or similar-esque videos, how can I kind of replicate this kind of like foundational guideline or structure to videos where people can easily be like, okay, cool. Like I'm coming to this person for this, not all of this. So now I know where to look in each video for that. And I think it just makes it a little bit more efficient for folks, which I think people can appreciate. Once you've watched a video to get an answer and it's taken like 30 minutes and you're like, I still don't have the fucking answer. So more so what I mean by that is if you're building out content that's somewhat similar, figuring out a means of time stamping and building out a nice like description structure to where when people come to your content, they know what they can expect and they know that they're going to be able to have their answers answered in an efficient way, basically. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you have returning visitors, like they know what to expect. That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. The time stamping is something that I have to get better at.
How do you come up with content ideas?
So it varies. I mean, like the good thing about shoe reviews is that with shoe reviews, always like shoes basically always coming out, a lot of the content kind of writes itself, because like if a Nike Metcon 8 comes out, for example, like last year, build out a review for that, build out a comparison to a couple of models that I constantly get asked questions on. So like a Reebok Metcon, Reebok Nano versus like a Nike Metcon, Nike Metcon versus the Under Armour Tri-Base Rain. So thinking about basically this core piece of content and then building out little tiny, like almost like leads to that bigger piece of content can be really useful. So essentially like a lot of my content production is dictated on shoes. But if I'm building out something on a broader topic, like let's say like a back squat guide, which is a topic that I'm not going to rank for right away because my channel isn't big enough, then thinking about like, okay, like what's a good cluster of content I can put under this that will prop this up? So it's like, okay, back squat mistakes, like tips for a beginner learning how to back squat. So when approaching topic ideas like that are a little bit bigger, that are a little bit more grandiose, figuring out how to cluster content under that will have more shots on net when it comes to actually reaching eyeballs because there's less competition. And then from there, you can prop up that bigger guide by leveraging, hey, I also have this guide here, check it out. And that can kind of help expedite the flow of that And so that's kind of like how I think about content. A lot of my production is based off of releases of shoes, but when I'm doing content on training and stuff, which is a little bit more like kind of just freestyling in the context of what I'm interested in and what I want to produce, I also think about, okay, like what's a good like cluster of content I could build around this to like really cover all of my bases without making like a 50-minute video on this.
Right. It's interesting that you're talking about making your content like that, because obviously with shoes, you know, it's like you said, the content is kind of there for you. You know what people are looking for, you know what questions they have. And yet when it comes to training, you know, I've noticed the same thing about my content is like, if I want to make, for example, I wanted to make a video on tricep extensions, but if I make a video on tricep extensions, I'm getting fucking buried. Like there's millions and millions and millions of those videos. But like you said, you know, the mistakes that you would make, or like why not to use a short rope, or like whatever like the best attachment would be, that is more solution based and gives people an opportunity to apply what they learn right away. And then it also, like you said, it narrows down the amount of people that could see it, but you're not going to get buried. So more people will end up seeing it, which is kind of counterintuitive to think about at first.
100%. I think a lot of content creators get it wrong when they think about like, I need to build out content, and they go after these big terms. Like, no, start small, go for long tail things, go for like questions that are super niche within what you want to build out content on. And then as you start to gain more steam, like that's when you could start tackling some of these bigger terms, or just build a big fucking video, but then build out like 10 little small funnel leads to that. And that just has a better shot to like really prop up that bigger piece of content that you want to be proud of and spend a lot of time on, but you might not be able to rank for because there is just so much competition. So I love that approach, and I'm glad that you found that works really well too, because it's one of those things that constantly gets overlooked, which is like, start small. Like if you go after like terms that like have like 2 other competitors, you'll have way more shots of building a channel faster, I think, than going after big terms, which is like ass backwards if we're really talking about like what you need to do for growth, etc.
How do you know how many competitors there are? Like, do you use like vidIQ or like different software like that, or what do you
here and there? Like I have vidIQ for my YouTube. For like website stuff, I'll look at like Ubersuggest or like Ahrefs offers. I don't know how you pronounce their name. And that can be really useful for getting some baseline like keyword data. But honestly, truthfully, Travis, like I have a background in SEO, but I don't create just content for SEO purposes. Like if you look at some of these fucking media sites, it's like you can tell that it's just built out to tackle the string of keywords that doesn't really actually make sense in the context of that niche. Mm-hmm. And I'm really waiting for the day for it all to get flipped up, because I was having this conversation the other day with my buddy, and it's like, at what point does SEO kind of hit that critical threshold where it's like, okay, we're fucking tired of these robot fucking answers that aren't really answering the nuances and depth that we're looking for within these niches? Because you have so many smaller blogs that just don't know the game and they get buried, but they're really fucking awesome content. And it sucks because you have like a Forbes and a Men's Health and all these like very generalist sites with writers who aren't actually knowing what the hell's going on within the niches, just kind of like mercenaries pumping out content based off of keywords that they're being fed or products that they're told to include, which then they just go to product pages, paraphrase, yada, yada. So I forgot where I was going with this, but
well, it seems like you kind of like more go off of feel a little bit then. So you just know, like in the back squat example, instead of just all analytics, like that seems to be like a recurring theme, is like what the way you do things and what works for you is like, you're just like, you really know your topic and you know the people that are listening and like what they want. And you kind of like go based off of what's interesting to you and feel like, you know, obviously shouldn't have to look at analytics to know that back squat guide is going to be something that is like heavily talked about versus something very like specific broken off of that. So like, do you kind of, you just kind of like, you just kind of like feel it out, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. So it's like this hybrid model of having some idea, but then also just knowing the industry. And also for context, folks, I'm really sorry. I'm coming from a deadlift workout, so I'm like a space cadet right now mentally. Yeah. But
dude, I'm surprised you're functional right now.
Dude, I slammed this protein shake and I'm like, I can do this. But to your point, Travis, yes. And I think that's where having the know-how in the industry and actually knowing the industry plays off huge, especially when it comes to building like a really good organic following, but also a really good community. Because you look at some of these sites that rank for some of these fitness terms, and then they're like just this generic AI written shit, or like it's SEO written shit. So it's like paying people basically to write SEO content for basically nothing. And these sites aren't really building a brand. Like, sure, they're getting nice results in search, but knowing the industry and like really displaying that authority and like, hey, like I'm like you, I'm spending my money on everything that I'm reviewing. These are all of the things you need to know. I think pays off bigger with really building up retention, and now having obviously some structure to knowing SEO and how to build out content to compete with the big dogs really helps. But I would rather take this hybrid approach where, sure, I might not rank number one for everything, but if you find my stuff, hopefully you end up coming back because you can see like, wow, the quality and like the actual depth to this is way more than what I was just consuming. And if you don't want depth, like that's fine. Like go read your Men's Health and buy something that they haven't tested, or, you know, like, so it's a hybrid approach, and having a good idea of SEO and how to play the game is obviously a must, but not falling susceptible to letting that dictate everything you do is the real key. And I think a lot of SEOs and a lot of people who build sites about niches that they don't really know shit in, they're just hiring people in. That's where they eventually fall short. And I think if we're talking long game, that's where I try to remind myself, where it's like, okay, this SEO site is beating me, but in 4 years from now, let's see where they're actually going to be at. They're not really building a community. They're not really building like a good traction of people who care. And that's where I think it's tricky to not fall into like that. I need to build out this content because this is what people are searching. Like, how do you build that out, but then also do it in a way that a human wants to consume it and somebody within your niche actually wants to consume it?
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the last things I want to touch on and kind of ask you about is like, you seem like you've taken this hybrid approach, and like you said, it's building a community, and it makes sense where like the people who are going to Men's Health and who are listening to that type of information, they're listening to very general information. That's where the back squat example would be, right? It's in that Men's Health type of environment, whereas people who are coming to you with much more specific. So like you mentioned, you know, back squats for tall people, back squats for people with flat feet, like the people who are coming to you. Do you find that by staying true to that, your part of the success that you've had in building your community is just that you're getting more advanced lifters that you can connect with better? Or how, like, what does your community look like? What type of population do you find you're engaging with or targeting the most?
I would say it's a blend, honestly. And like, I would say probably bias is more beginner and intermediates versus like advanced lifters, to be quite honest.
Oh, really? That's cool.
And I think that has a lot to do with like just folks reaching out and like based on the language that they use when they're asking me questions and whatnot. Yeah. And like how we engage back and forth. That's kind of where I pick up like, okay, like where's your expertise? Like where might you be coming from? So it's like a nice hybrid blend of I would say like some advanced lifters here and there, but then also like beginners and intermediates, because where I like to steer into, where it's like, hey, like I'm just the regular gym bro too, but like I am trying to push all these verticals and like really dive deep into the weeds, but I'm also like a simpleton at the end of the day. Like I can language things in a simple way. And I think people have found that they kind of connect with that, where it's like they want nuance, but not so much nuance to where it's like, okay, like, does this information actually like really pertain to me? So I think trying to strike that line is really important. And I think that's why like building out the content, for example, that is a little bit more niche, but languaging in a nice beginner way, but then also hitting on some advanced topics, I think it casts a slightly wider net for getting people who really know their shit and interested, or at least engaging, but then also like kind of hooking beginners into like, should I be focusing on this? Do I really need to care about this? I have a question about this. Oh, he actually answered me. Like, that's sick, because a lot of these channels and a lot of these sites aren't going to do that for you. So yeah, it's like, it's funny because like you would think like diving into these niche topics, I'd only be getting advanced people, but that's not necessarily true. And I think if you can create a blend of content that's both beginner and advanced friendly, but then also write or like produce content in a means that does kind of strike that like mid tone to where a beginner could understand it, but it also like does answer an advanced person's question, it gives you like this really nice, like wider net for a potential community to be built upon. Like, am I having like world record powerlifters check out my stuff? No, because like they know what they're doing. They don't need my content to like pick a shoe, you know? But if you are a lifter who, for example, like is like in the weeds of like transitioning from that intermediate to advanced stage, sure, maybe you'll look to my content. So yeah, I would say it's more like beginner intermediate, and that's kind of backwards from what you would think if I'm going more niche. And I think what's cool, and this is my hope, is that I think people are starting to recognize the bullshit from some of the bigger media sites and some of the bigger content producers out there, and they're getting kind of fed up with it. This is only an ad. This is not even answering my question. This doesn't even look right. So I think I'm fucking hoping that over the next couple of years, we're going to see a nice shift of less interest in these big sites and people actually seeking out smaller sites and smaller authorities that they can connect with, that actually connect with them on like a human level versus just I'm trying to make money off of your eyeballs level.
I already do that 100%.
Yeah,
like I specifically look for like, you know, people that are harder to find in like as I'm growing like my video business. It's like, that's where because you just go on some like big blog and it's just like the same bullshit. And like, I know enough now to know that that's not the best information, but I don't know enough to know all of the information. So it's like, I find these people who are more niche.
Yeah. And that's something that I think we see because we're a little bit more advanced in our fields. Yeah. But, you know, it's like with everything, like it's a slow burn. Like somebody who hasn't had the exposure that we've had, who have interacted with the same like folks who are at a slightly deeper depth than us, it's going to take a slightly longer time. So that's why I'm like not expecting like the Gen Pop to necessarily know to do that, because every time I like call out like a shitty review, I still have people be like, oh my God, like now I know to look for this. So there's still a lot of like the transition that needs to go on because there's just not enough exposure to it yet. But to your point right there, Travis, I'm stoked to hear that, because it is highlighting that like people who are a little bit more advanced in these fields, like they're starting to naturally look for more depth versus trusting some of these quote unquote big authorities that have established credibility over the last however many years by just being like the only authority to look at, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm glad that the industry is shifting that way as well. But yeah, man, this has been great. I know this was kind of like a short conversation, and we're gonna have to wrap it up a little bit early here, but I definitely want to encourage our people to go check out your Instagram, your YouTube, all your social media. So like, Jake, give yourself the plug, man, before we take off here. Where can people find you and learn more about you and check out your reviews and whatnot?
For sure. And thank you for having me on, guys, sincerely. But on YouTube, you can search Jake That Fit Friend. If you want to sub, dope. I'm not going to ask you to watch every video and like every video, but if I produce anything that does help you along the way, just drop a like. It helps a ton. And then on Instagram, Jake_Boly, Boly. And if you ever want to get lost in the weeds of shoe content, my website is thatfitfriend.com. Publish a lot of individual reviews, comparisons, best lists. So basically any ask you might have on particular shoes of weightlifting, cross training, barefoot, hopefully I deliver the content you need regarding performance asks. But yeah, any support's awesome. And I really do appreciate you guys having me on and us making it through this like sprint episode.
Of course, man. Yeah, no, it's really good. And this is valuable information, stuff that I think people are starting to become more aware of how important your footwear is, when we're starting to realize like our feet are getting kind of fucked up, you know, from a lot of shoes. And so whether it's the shoes or the training modality or, you know, the exercise instruction, I think y'all should definitely check out Jake's page. And yeah, again, man, we appreciate you coming on. Hopefully you recover well from this deadlift workout and your brain gets back to 100%, because mine usually doesn't for like a day and a half. So I
don't know if my brain's ever at 100%, dude.
That's fair. It's probably because we deadlift and squat too much. But thank you, Jake. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise and teaching us a little bit about your content strategy, because God knows we need the help. So I appreciate you, man.
Thanks for having me on, y'all.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode. We'll see you next week.